Hello, and thanks to those of you who may be looking at this video of the wonderful works of the Spanish painter Joaquin Sorolla. Before I begin, I want to mention two things. The first is to ask those of you who are fluent Spanish speakers to please excuse my mispronunciation of any of the names I may mention. The second is to tell you that I am reliably informed that Joaquin Sorolla's name should be pronounced as Joaquin Sorolla, but I find it much easier to use Joaquin. Joaquin Sorolla was an amazing artist who produced thousands of wonderful paintings like this one, which is Kissing the Relic, which he painted in 1893, so when he was 30 years old. However, he mostly painted very much lighter and more joyful scenes, and as you will see in this presentation, he adored painting people enjoying the glorious Spanish sunlight. Every time I Googled Sorolla, more and more of his paintings appeared to view. He was a phenomenally prolific and versatile artist, so there will be some which I will have to show very briefly with little comment so that you can see as many as possible of his works. This he simply called Boy in the Breakers, and you can see that it is composed of just a few relatively quick dashes of his paintbrush. Joaquin Sorolla y Bastida was one of history's most brilliant artists, and yet, despite his exhibitions attracting vast attendances in Spain, on one occasion more than 2 million visitors, his stunning paintings are still not all that well known outside of this country. This one he called Afternoon Sun. This is a painting of Joaquin's son, also called Joaquin, when he was about 4 years old, but no doubt the two looked fairly similar at that age. Joaquin was born in Valencia in February 1863. His father was quite a wealthy cloth merchant, and he also was called Joaquin Sorolla. His mother was Concepcion Bastida, and he had a sister called Concha, who was a year younger. They lived in quite a privileged part of the centre of Valencia. However, sadly in 1865, so when Joaquin was 3 and his sister 2, they were orphaned when both of their parents died from cholera. They were then raised in a much less comfortable economic situation by their maternal aunt Isabel and her husband Pepe, who was a locksmith. Joaquin received his initial art education at his school in Valencia, where, at the very young age of 9, it was already clear that he had a great passion for art. With the support of the Marqués de Villagracia, who had seen some of the paintings by the young artist, Joaquin had entered the Valencia Art Academy in 1878, when he was only 15. He was already winning major prizes for his paintings at the Academy. He showed such promise that he soon began lessons with Salustiano Asenjo, who was the senior director of the Academy. And this is one of his earliest paintings, which he did when he was studying there. Sorolla had a young friend called Tono Garcia, who showed one of Joaquin's paintings to his father, Antonio Garcia, who was a well-known Valencian photographer. Garcia was so impressed with Sorolla's work that he invited him to use his studio for his painting, and Sorolla worked there for some years, and later he would marry Garcia's lovely daughter, Clotilde. At the age of 18, Sorolla travelled to Madrid, where he was able to spend some time enthusiastically studying the wonderful paintings housed there in the great Prado Museum. He then had to complete his military service, as Spain was involved in various conflicts, including a war with Morocco in the late 1800s. This is actually a painting of Joaquin's son, Joaquin Sorolla Garcia, as there don't appear to be any pictures from when Joaquin Sr. was a youth, but they looked fairly similar in later life. After completing his military service, Sorolla at age 22 obtained a grant which enabled him to spend 4 years studying painting in Rome. When he went to Rome, he was welcomed by Francisco Padilla, who was the director of the Spanish Academy there. He also spent time studying with José Benlliure, who was the leader of the Spanish colony in Rome, and also with José Villegas Cordero, who at that time was a well-known Spanish artist. By his mid-20s, Sorolla had firmly established himself on the national stage in Spain, and by the time he was 30, he displayed paintings at international exhibitions in Paris, Venice, Munich, Berlin, and Chicago. He was such a serious-looking young man, and yet most of his paintings were so full of joy. By the turn of the century, so when he was about 37, Sorolla was already recognized as one of the Western world's greatest living artists, having received gold medals at several major international exhibitions. At the age of 53, Sorolla started work on a major commission to produce a series of vast panels celebrating the life and customs of the different regions of Spain. He had received this commission from a very wealthy supporter of the arts in America called Archer Milton Huntington, who was the founder of the Hispanic Society of America's new headquarters in New York. This work was to dominate the final 8 years of Sorolla's life, and we will return to those wonderful paintings later. But this is an indication of the size of some of the paintings he produced for the Hispanic Society in New York. And so, returning to his early life, in 1884, at the age of only 21, Sorolla painted this wonderful picture which he called Valencians Prepare to Resist the Invaders. It depicts the people of Valencia preparing to defend themselves against the invading French armies during the dreadful Peninsular War, which was part of the Napoleonic Wars. The French had invaded Spain, and the British and Portuguese armies had joined forces with Spain in the conflict. In the same year of 1884, whilst he was still only 21, Sorolla also painted this magnificent depiction of the death of Captain Pedro Velard y Santilla during the defense of the Monteleon artillery barracks. This was Sorolla's interpretation of the death of the Spanish artillery captain who became famous in Spain for his heroic defense of the artillery barracks against the French occupation of Madrid, again in the Spanish Peninsular War. The Peninsular War was the bloodiest event in Spanish history, with well over 1 million Spaniards being killed, which was more than double the casualties caused by fighting in the more recent Civil War. The Peninsular War ended 48 years before Sorolla was born, but Spain was still suffering from the terrible loss of life in that war. So, these were two wonderful examples of Sorolla's paintings of events during that dreadful time, which he completed when he was only 21 years old. But he mostly went on to paint far, far gentler and more colourful canvases. In 1887, so when he was 24 years old, Sorolla painted this wonderful study of 3 heads of the same person. In the same year, he painted this, which was titled Father Joffrey Protecting a Madman. Just look at the detail and wonderful interpretation of a sad event in this painting. The young men and even the child in the centre, all with rocks in their hands, ready to throw. No doubt, Sorolla must have witnessed a similar event and then painted everything from memory. Sorolla quickly developed into a very successful painter, and over the first decade of the 20th century his output was incredible, both in quality and in quantity. As well as painting many striking portraits, his newfound wealth enabled him to devote himself more fully to painting wherever and whatever he wanted. He called this one "Time for a Bathe", and he painted dozens of similar scenes. This was a painting he did which, I'm not sure, but I think is of his sister Concha with one of her children. Throughout the decade of 1900 to 1910, Sorolla was completing hundreds of paintings each year. They were often canvases of 2 meters or more, which he usually painted while standing on the beach. He loved to paint scenes like this, and he was always dressed in a smart, formal suit whilst he explored the wonderful effects of the Spanish sunlight. His paintings usually illustrated very happy scenes, such as this one of children simply enjoying playing together in the surf. It's noticeable that there weren't any little fat kids in those days. Sorolla painted very, very quickly. He said, "I couldn't paint at all if I had to paint slowly." Most of his pictures were painted in only 4 to 6 mornings, and many were completed in only 1 or 2 days. Sorolla didn't have a set idea of how painting would turn out before he started. He preferred to build up the composition as he went along. When working in his studio, he'd sometimes use an enormous palette, almost the size of a baby grand piano lid, and 3-foot-long brushes to allow him to stand back from his painting. Here he's using a table as his palette. And here he is again, this time how he usually dressed for work, complete with a suit and brogue shoes. This is Valencia Port, done in 1881, so when he was only 18 years old. Look at his beautiful interpretation of sea and sky. I had to check and recheck the date of his painting just to reassure myself that he was so young when he completed this absolutely extraordinary work. Then, in the following year, in 1882, this is another painting of the port of Valencia. Actually, this was one of Sorolla's very rare, almost miniature paintings. It was only 46 by 25 centimeters, which is 18 inches by 10 inches. But again, just look at his wonderful interpretation of the sky and the sea. Again, this is Valencia Port painted 8 years later in 1900. And yet another from around the same time. I thought the figures in this one were rather like those matchstick men which Lowry painted many years later. In many ways, they illustrate Sorolla's urge to complete his painting quickly so he can start on the next one. In 1888, when he was 23, Sorolla returned to Valencia to marry Clotilde Garcia del Castillo, who he first met in 1879, while he was working in her father's studio. When they first met, he was only 16 years old and she was 13, and they had a 9-year courtship before marrying. I think you may agree that Clotilde was a very attractive lady. This was a photograph of the happy couple taken by Clotilde's father. In 1890, the couple moved to Madrid, and for the next 10 years, Sorolla's efforts as an artist were focused mainly on the production of large canvases of historical and social subjects, which were intended for display in the salons of the grand houses owned by many of his very wealthy clients. He also quickly became wealthy due to their patronage. This is a painting which he called First Birth, showing Clotilde with their first baby daughter, Maria, in 1890. And this was a painting of Clotilde done in 1891, perhaps in some respects rather similar to portraits painted by the French artist Degas, who was a contemporary of Sorolla. By 1895, Joaquin and Clotilde had 3 children: Maria, born in 1890, Joaquin, born in 1892, and Eleanor, born in 1895. I love this painting of his family with the eldest Maria on the left, then young Joaquin in a smock as young boys from well-to-do families did in those days, and the baby Eleanor looking perhaps as if she just wet her nappy. It is a beautiful painting with such quick and simple brush strokes, and Sorolla probably completed it in just a couple of days. This is a more detailed and careful painting of the family a few years later. Again, I love the way in which Joaquin Jr. is depicted as a budding artist, and Joaquin Sr. is shown reflected in the mirror whilst painting this scene. And this is Clotilde and their daughters in their garden in 1910, so when Sorolla was 47. Sorolla's first major international successes were achieved with 2 paintings. The first was this, which he called The Happy Day, which appears to be of a fisherman's family celebrating the confirmation of their young daughter. Perhaps mother and father in the background, although they do look rather elderly. And she's being blessed possibly by her grandfather. Her brother on the left is dressed in his Sunday best, but is barefooted, and grandmother sits quietly behind him. You can see a hen pecking away in the foreground. The second major international success was this one, which he called Another Marguerite. Both of these paintings were completed in 1892, so when he was 29 years old. The most famous and successful of these was this one, which was awarded a gold medal at the National Exhibition in Madrid. Later, it won first prize at the Chicago International Exhibition, where it was purchased by a benefactor who presented it to the Washington University Museum in St. Louis, Missouri. This painting was a milestone in Sorolla's career. It made his reputation in the United States, and as I mentioned, it earned him a Medal of Honor at the World Exposition in Chicago in 1893. He based his composition on an incident he witnessed in a third-class railway carriage when he was travelling between Madrid and Valencia. He saw 2 members of the Guardia Civil accompanying a female prisoner who was being brought to justice for the murder of her child, and, no doubt, to her execution. So Sorolla used meticulous detail to emphasize the misery of the scene. He used models in a borrowed railway car rather than paint this picture in his studio. The Spartan space heightens the prisoner's isolation, and sunlight highlights her face even while she slumps over in shame or in defeat. The name of Marguerite was a slang term used for prostitutes used in Valencia at that time. This was Sorolla's son, Joaquin Sorolla Garcia, dressed in white, which was painted in 1896, so when Sorolla was 33 and his son was 4. In 1897, Sorolla painted this, which he called Dr. Cimarron at the Microscope. He presents his friend, Dr. Cimarron, as a man of science who transmits his wisdom by investigating scientific matters. It was described as a triumph of naturalism as it recreates the indoor environment of the laboratory, with the luminous atmosphere produced by the artificial light of a gas burner in the background, contrasting with the weak afternoon sunlight that shines through an unseen window. In the same year of 1897, he painted this, which he simply called A Research. These 2 paintings linking art and science were presented at the National Exhibition of Fine Arts held in Madrid in that same year of 1897, and Sorolla won the prize of honour. These paintings depicting scientific study are certainly among the most outstanding world paintings of this genre. However, as I said earlier, most of Sorolla's paintings are so joyful, colourful and inspiring. This was called Strolling Along the Seashore, and he painted it in 1909. Let us look at it and marvel at the colours and the compositions of these paintings and the way in which Sorolla was able to recreate the wonderful sunlight. Here, two guitarists appear to be visiting a rather grand house with the ladies listening in absolutely rapt attention to their music. A really beautiful and quite detailed painting. This is a self-portrait done when Sorolla was 41. He was passionate about two loves in his life, his family and his art. Other than Sundays, he would work 6 to 9 hours every day, often standing in the full glare of the sun and almost always dressed in a suit. This is a photograph taken in 1904 by a friend when Sorolla was 43. The painting was titled Clotilde in a Black Dress. Again, despite working indoors, Sorolla wore one of his suits while painting. So, this is that lovely painting. Although I must say that Clotilde has an almost impossibly narrow waistline. Sorolla and Clotilde had a very passionate relationship. When travelling, Sorolla would write to her every day, often sending flowers inside the letters which he wrote to her. However, I must admit that looking at the photograph again, Clotilde actually does have a remarkably narrow waist. In one of his letters, he said to her, "All of my love is focused on you. Despite my great love for our children, you are more, much more than them, for so many reasons that there's no need for me to mention. You are my body, my life, my mind, my perpetual ideal." He certainly was a very romantic man. This is his son Joaquin when he was aged 18. He painted many portraits of his son, and he spent some years living in England. He seems to have enjoyed the life of a very wealthy young man, living for some time in London until the outbreak of the First World War. During his stay in England, he suffered a motorcycle accident which would lead to his mother Clotilde and sister Eleanor travelling to London to accompany him back home. He made a quick recovery, and in the 1920s he lived for some time in New York. Joaquin Sorolla Garcia was a young man of his time, always fashionable and careful with his appearance, and although some of his romances are very well known, he never got married. When he died, he bequeathed all of his assets, including many of his father's paintings, to the Sorolla Museum Foundation in Madrid. In 1910, Joaquin Sorolla completed this painting of his daughter Maria, aged 20, which he called Maria with a Hat. And this delightful picture, which he called Beneath the Canopy, was again painted in 1910. This lovely painting shows a mother waiting for a child to come out of the sea, and she's about to envelop him in the large towel, once again painted in 1910. This is just so beautiful with the sunlight shining through the towel, and you can see there are more children swimming in the background near to the fishing boat. This is a self-portrait with Sorolla sitting surrounded by beautifully colourful flowers. As usual, he's dressed in one of his suits. This shows the local fishermen having returned to shore and selling the catch of fish. It's called Return from Fishing on Valencia Beach, and this painting was sold by Sotheby's in London on the 10th of December 2014 for £1.4 million. This is a lovely painting of a fiesta celebration where the villagers have gathered to enjoy their traditional dances. Remember that almost all of these paintings were completed in or around Valencia, and many were done on the beaches of Denia and Xavier. Sorolla absolutely adored this area of Spain. This is a lone fisherman going home with his nets, maybe for his wife to carry out repairs, ready for the following day's fishing trip. This was called Valencian Fisherwomen. I'm not sure, but I think that this is a beautiful painting of Sorolla's sister Concha with her child, but it could be just of a very attractive lady he happened to meet on the beach. This is called A Grey Day, and it's one of the very few paintings by Sorolla which does not celebrate the glorious Costa Blanca sunshine. Here we have a beautiful painting of Clotilde shortly after giving birth to one of their children, which he painted in 1894. And this is a detail from that same beautiful painting. This is one of his most acclaimed works, which he called And They Still Say Fish is Expensive, and it was also painted in 1894 when Sorolla was 31. This is a wonderful painting of a boy who's been very badly injured whilst out fishing. This picture is undoubtedly the best known work with a social theme produced by Sorolla. It presents a sensitive issue in Sorolla's native Valencia in what must be one of the most moving scenes in turn-of-the-century Spanish art. It shows a scene inside the hold of a fishing boat where a young sailor who's barely a boy is lying on the deck after an accident at sea. On his naked torso hangs a medallion, which is a protective amulet believed to guard fishermen against misfortune. The young man is being treated for his injury by two old fishing companions, both with serious concentration on their faces. One holds him by the shoulders, whilst the other, who's wearing a traditional Catalan cap, applies a compress which is just wet in the pot of water in the foreground to the wound. The three sailors are surrounded by fishing tackle, and in the background to the left is a pile of fish caught during the unfortunate day's work. You can see here the silent, restrained fortitude of the two old sea dogs as they care for the delicate, helpless body of the possibly fatally injured youth. The way Sorolla captures the light shining in through the boat's hatch, bathing the hold and its contents in a clear half-light, reveals the extent of his artistry. Reviewers of this renowned painting were virtually unanimous in their praise, and even inspired passionate poems in tribute to its author. This painting was eventually purchased by the Museum of Luxembourg. He called this painting White Slave Trade, and he painted it in 1895, so when he was 32. It shows four young prostitutes asleep in a railway carriage under the watchful eye of their Celestina, or procuress. This type of painting was very popular in Europe, with its focus on the dramatic conditions endured by the local lower social classes. This is a detail from that same painting. So beautiful, but also so sad. In contrast, this is a wonderfully colourful painting simply called Sewing the Sail, done a year later in 1896. The way in which the sunlight falls on this scene really is rather wonderful. Also in 1896, Sorolla received a commission from an extremely wealthy Chilean gentleman called Rafael Errázuriz Urmeneta to create two unique vertical panels to flank each side of a door. The theme of these paintings was intended to celebrate the Chilean wine industry, and the composition was to be presented in a neoclassical or Greco-Roman style, which was the fashion of the early 20th century, especially in the bourgeoisie circles. The one on the left was called the Great Press, and Sorolla spent some time in Xavier and Denia preparing these two paintings. He painted the Great Press in Xavier in 1897, following his first visit there in 1896. The composition on the left is presented in a classical way, with the man clad in a Roman or Greek-styled toga draped over his strong-looking body, using his weight to press the grapes whilst the child is collecting the juice. As you can see, the grape leaves in the background have their autumn gold colour. The second of the two panels on the right was titled The Harvest. Again, to salute the demands of his patron from Chile, Sorolla painted stylized women in Greek robes caught in the act of picking grapes. Although the landscape is of Xavier, the grapes are not the local green muscatel variety, but a dark purple, suggesting perhaps Chilean types of grape. What captures the attention of anyone who knows Xavier is the beautiful Mediterranean blue sky on a clear day that highlights Cape Saint Martin in the background. 10 years later, in 1907, the same patron, Rafael Errázuriz Urmeneta, travelled to Madrid with his family and commissioned Sorolla to paint a family portrait, for which he paid the then astronomical price of 40,000 pesetas. You would think that at such a price the painting was a grand work, but Sorolla completed it in only 12 days. In this painting, Errázuriz's Chilean wife has a central focal point. She's surrounded by her flock of 5 girls and a boy. She transmits a subtle elegance. The whole group, except for the father, looks at the painter. This is another beautiful interpretation of fishing life, which Sorolla called Meal on the Boat, done in 1898 when he was 35. Just a wonderfully happy scene with the crew sharing their meal with a couple of youngsters. This is an early photograph of Xavier taken in 1920. It is believed that Sorolla, Clotilde and their family stayed in one of these houses when they visited Xavier. This is the same view painted by Sorolla a few years earlier, in 1905. During one of his visits to Xavier, Sorolla hired a nanny called Ramona Sanchez to watch over their youngest child, Eleanor. Unknown to the Sorolla family, this maid had a very jealous boyfriend from Murcia called Bartolome Cueras, who was a member of the Guardia Civil, and he was a widower who had 3 children. Ramona had received letters from him, but she never bothered to answer them. He decided to travel from Murcia to Xavier to confront Ramona and to demand an explanation as to why she was ignoring him. He eventually found Ramona with another maid named Asuncion at the community laundry. He had developed a passion for Ramona, which, unfortunately, she did not return. On August the 21st, 1905, between 6 or 7 in the morning, his amorous intentions turned into what the local newspaper described as a bloody and vulgar drama that filled the neighbourhood with dismay because they were unaccustomed to witnessing such horrible events. He stayed with the 2 girls whilst they did the washing, and when finished, he escorted them to the door of the holiday residence of the Sorolla family. According to Asuncion, the other maid, Bartolome talked with Ramona in a low voice, and she answered him coldly. At the door of the residence, Bartholomew grabbed Ramona's arm and held on tight as she fought to escape his clutch. As he was in the Guardia Civil, he had a rifle, and the distressed Bartholomew then shot Ramona in the back and in one quick move aimed the gun at his own head and pulled the trigger. She was seriously injured and he died. This was a brief newspaper report at the time. Sorolla had been ill in bed for a few days, and he said that whilst he and Clotilde were still in bed, they heard 3 shots and shouts and running. He was too ill to get out of bed, but Clotilde ran out and she witnessed the horrible scene. On a happier note, whilst he was staying at Xavier, Sorolla painted many pictures, and these are just a few. He manages to create wonderful contrast between sunlight and shadows in his paintings. This is a lovely picture which looks as though the young boy may have made some cheeky suggestion which slightly embarrassed the girl. And this is a local lady with a wonderful hat, and she also has quite a cheeky grin. Both of these paintings are Sorolla's lovely wife, Clotilde. He completed so many paintings of her. More lovely paintings of Clotilde. When I enlarged this painting, I could see that it was mostly created using simple, quick strokes with a wide brush and probably was completed in only one day. And yet, it says everything that the artist wanted to convey to the viewer. We call this painting Swimmers at Xavier, and he completed this in 1905. And this is a young girl from Xavier enjoying the results of the harvest. And here we have some children enjoying the rocks and the surf near Xavier. This looks as though it may be a well-to-do family with the father on the right and the mother on the left with their grown-up children. When I looked carefully at this picture, I thought it remarkable how like their father the 2 girls are, and the son so like his mother. Sorolla absolutely loved to paint children enjoying themselves by the sea. Sorolla's paintings were mostly so joyful. However, as well as painting many striking portraits, his newfound wealth enabled him to devote himself more fully to painting wherever and whatever he wanted. The title of this painting is Sad Inheritance, which he painted in 1899, so when he was 36 years old. It's of a group of children, some probably with poliomyelitis and others who are blind, bathing at Valencia's beach under the watchful eye of a caring priest. It is a very large canvas which won him the Grand Prix, a Gold Medal of Honor, and a nomination as Knight of the Legion of Honor at the Universal Exhibition in Paris in 1900, and in the following year a Medal of Honor at the National Exhibition in Madrid. This artist painted only exactly what he saw, and he was full of pity for the downtrodden. As I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, throughout this decade Sorolla was completing hundreds of paintings each year, often canvases of 2 meters or more, which he painted whilst on the beach. Between 1647 and 1651, the famous Spanish artist Diego Velázquez painted this beautiful picture known as the Rokeby Venus, or Venus with a Mirror. In 1902, influenced by the Velázquez painting, Joaquin Sorolla painted Female Nude. It is oil on canvas and the model is his wife Clotilde. As well as the beautiful figure, please just look at his wonderful artistry in the painting of the silk bed cover. This was Clotilde on the Beach, done in 1904. When viewing this painting, you're almost squinting at the scene as you can imagine the harsh midday sun which is backlighting the sitter. This painting illustrates the cooler shadows on her white dress. And this is The White Boat, painted in 1905. And he called this lovely picture Lighthouse Walk at Biarritz. This is Watching the Fish in 1907. It was obviously painted in a garden or park with this lovely pond, and again the contrast between sun and shade are really quite remarkable. Here we have a village scene which he called the Orange Cellar. Look at the lady on the left washing her pots in the communal sink, the men at the table on the right setting the world to rights with the inevitable carafe of red wine, and don't miss the back end of the donkey in the background. Just a delightful country village scene. Here we have a well-to-do gentleman with his wife or daughter enjoying the remains of a lovely alfresco meal in his garden, again with his carafe of red wine, or perhaps port. This is a photograph of Sorolla in his rather grand studio in Madrid. Just look at the length of the paintbrushes which he preferred to use. This he called Running Along the Beach, which he painted in 1908. Just look at the glistening water on the boy's body and the sheer enjoyment of the girls being chased. He grew a reputation for these wonderful beach scenes which he painted endlessly. He had an uncanny ability for capturing the effects of the blazing Mediterranean sunlight. Many of these pictures, often large canvases, were executed in the open air on the beach, as evidenced by the grains of sand embedded in their densely painted surfaces. Two more lovely beach scenes with boats. This one and this one. And again, he so loved to paint these innocent pictures of children on the beach. In 1909, the Hispanic Society of America hosted an exhibition of Sorolla's work in New York City. Of the 356 paintings on show at that exhibition, a total of 195 were sold. In the same year of 1909, he painted this, which he called The Horse's Bath. Sorolla once said, "I hate darkness," and he also said, "Claude Monet once said that paintings in general simply do not have enough light in them," and I agree with him. We painters, however, can never reproduce sunlight as it really is. We can only approach the truth of it. This is The Drinking Jug, which he painted in 1904. I'm not sure what this lady is reading, but it seems to have everyone's attention. In 1909, Sorolla was invited to paint a portrait of American President William Taft. This is Bath Time in Valencia, also painted in 1909. And yet another lovely painting from 1909. This is The Injured Foot. This is a self-portrait done in 1909, so when he was 46 years old. Sorolla painted so many images of his wife. He painted her time and time again throughout their marriage. As I said earlier, she was a very attractive woman. Because he became so famous and successful at a relatively young age, Sorolla was able to spend more and more time with his wife and children, and he was dedicated to his family. He was also able to spend more time painting in his garden, which he loved. This was the Cypress of the Sultana, which he painted in 1910. In 1911, he was invited to paint this picture of Queen Victoria Eugenie. She was one of Queen Victoria's grandchildren, and she married King Alfonso XIII of Spain in 1906. This is called Under the Awning at the beach of Zarutz, which is in the north near to San Sebastian. And this is a very different day with a storm at San Sebastian. This is a lovely painting called Blessing the Boat. Just look at the kneeling boy hiding his grinning face with his hat from the older men who are so serious. In 1911, Sorolla was invited by the Hispanic Society in New York to start work on a major commission to produce a series of vast panels celebrating the life and customs of the different regions of Spain. All were to be on permanent display at their new headquarters in New York. This enormous and exhausting endeavour was to dominate the next 8 years of Sorolla's life, although he still managed to find time to paint some of his most stunning beach scenes. As I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, this monumental series of paintings known as Visions of Spain was commissioned in 1911 by Archer Milton Huntington, who was the founder of the Hispanic Society in New York. The whole series of paintings were to be displayed in the new gallery, specifically built to house them. Sorolla had already been the subject of two enormously successful travelling exhibitions in the United States, organised by the Hispanic Society in 1909 and 1911, so his work was already quite well known there. Nearly 12 feet tall and 200 feet in combined length, the canvases that comprised Visions of Spain were painted by Sorolla at various locations in Spain between 1912 and 1919, and they were then shipped to New York. When standing in the gallery, the viewer is surrounded by the peoples, the costumes and the traditions of the various regions of Spain. Both Sorolla and Huntington noted that the series represented a Spain that was, even in those days, already on the point of disappearing. Unfortunately, the paintings that Sorolla considered his greatest works were not hung at the Hispanic Society's gallery in 1926, which was 3 years after the artist's. In 2006 to 2007, all of these canvases were returned and restored for an exhibition tour in Spain. Sorolla's Visions of Spain was exhibited in Valencia, Seville, Malaga, Bilbao, Barcelona and Madrid over a period of 3 years between November 2007 and February 2010. This shows some of his paintings after having been shipped from New York, being prepared for the magnificent exhibition of his work in Spain. Never before, on public view in Spain, Sorolla's masterworks created a sensation that attracted over 2 million visitors, making it the most visited exhibition in Spain's history. This is the Fiesta del Pan, or the Feast of the Bread, with the village gathering together in procession with the ladies displaying their local produce. This was the first of the murals he completed in the series of 14 for the Hispanic Society. Sorolla was keen to depict both the rich and those from poorer backgrounds. This appears to be a traditional Easter parade. And here we have matadors preparing for the bullfight. and yet another of the wonderful Fiesta Day parades, possibly an earlier version of the Moors Christians. But of course, the Spanish never needed much of an excuse to organise a parade. And this is a small fish market where the wives of the fishermen have brought their catches to sell. Just look at the proud horse riders with their wives passing the orange sellers. This picture completely illustrates Spanish village life in the hot sun in the late 19th century. When Sorolla and his family lived in Madrid, Sorolla's other great love was always for his home city of Valencia, and he returned to Valencia every year, drawn to the intense light and broad horizon of the coast. He often travelled down to Denia and Xavier, and I believe this was painted on the beach near Denia. Look at the baskets of carefully displayed fish being offered for sale. This is a more detailed view of that painting. Just a wonderful painting of a simple fish market. This is the tuna catch. The tuna catch is the final and for me the finest of the Hispanic Society panels. When this exhibition first opened in 1909, it attracted some 160,000 visitors to the Hispanic Society building in New York in a period of only 1 month. Whilst doing this painting, Sorolla had complained about persistent dizziness and old age, much of which he attributed to the struggling and suffering that he'd endured throughout working on and completing the vast Huntingdon Commission. However, once he got into applying paint, his spirits were lifted by the splendour of the scene and the energy of the fishermen around and behind him. Sorolla took 5 days to set this composition and 30 sessions, usually of 4 to 5 hours each day, over 5 weeks to complete this picture, which he would later describe as the fiercest of all of the panels. A wonderful painting of tuna fishermen with naval sailors admiring their catch. This is a wonderfully colourful group of flamenco dancers, all with their castanets. You can almost hear them clacking when you look at this picture. The fully renovated Sorolla Vision of Spain at the Hispanic Society's gallery in New York was inaugurated in 2010 on the return of the paintings from the wonderfully successful tour of Spain. What a tremendous testimony to the utter genius of the man. So this was how the quite magnificent series of paintings commissioned by the Hispanic Societies in New York is displayed. I mentioned that Sorolla spent 8 years of his life working on these magnificent paintings, but he never saw these works installed as a complete exhibition because he died before the full installation was finished. However, after completing the enormous Hispanic Society's commission, Sorolla continued to paint his wonderful beach scenes. He called this After Bathing, with the child being shaded from the hot sun. You can almost feel the heat when you look at some of his paintings. This was painted in 1915. This is a photograph of Sorolla completing his painting of children on the beach in 1916. Just look for a moment at those 3 children. And this was that beautiful painting. This was The Inquisitive Child, which he painted in 1916. This he called The Pink Robe, also completed in 1916 with a detail from the picture on the right. And this is a photograph of him painting in 1920 in the garden of his house in Madrid. In the same year of 1920, Sorolla suffered a paralysing stroke whilst painting in his garden. He died 3 years later in 1923. He was 60 years old and is buried as a state hero. His body was transported in a cortege by train from Madrid to Valencia, where it was greeted by thousands, and there, in his hometown, he was buried in full state pomp. And this is his grave in Valencia. He was survived by Clotilde for a short time, but she died just 3 years later in 1929 when she was 63. After his death, Sorolla's widow Clotilde Garcia del Castillo gifted their beautiful villa in Madrid and many of his paintings to the Spanish public. The paintings eventually formed a collection which is now known as the Museo Sorolla, which was the artist's house in Madrid. The Sorolla railway station in Valencia was named in his honour in 2010. And so, there you have it. Joaquin Sorolla, quite a serious-looking man, but an artist who painted the most wonderfully happy, sun-drenched pictures. Thank you for looking at this video.